Hey everyone, welcome to the 206th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And this week we have a pretty tremendous show for you today. We're going to be talking about a new machine learning board at the edge. We've got Apple buying some patents that are of interest. I want an Echo Auto, and I'm going to tell you why. We've got a new August video doorbell. We've got some tips for Madam A. We've got a dead robot. Plus, we've got a lot of advice on hubs to talk about. And we're going to hear how Mitsubishi Bank has connected tiny devices using the Affero platform. Plus, we're going to hear from Chrissy Meyer, who is a partner at Root Ventures. She's going to explain why our connected devices cost so darn much. So, let's get this party started. But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Western Digital. Western Digital builds data solutions that enable the world to solve its biggest challenges. Western Digital is introducing its most advanced flash storage solution, the EU511. This is built to empower 5G mobile devices. It'll allow you to play more games, save more memories, and binge more videos. So get ready for your 5G future at westerndigital.com. Okay, Kevin, I guess we're going to start off with machine learning at the edge. So Google has a new development board. Let's talk about the Coral.
They actually announced this last year at the Google Next conference. That's their big cloud conference. And they said, we've got some upcoming hardware products. Now they are quietly launched in beta. The name is Coral, as you had said. One is a USB stick and one is almost like a Raspberry Pi sized board. In fact, if it wasn't for this ginormous heatsink and fan on the processor, I would have thought it was a Raspberry Pi, but it's not. It is a custom board for Edge, Google's Edge TPU. That's their TensorFlow processing unit. So for example, you could connect this to a camera device, and what Google says it can use state-of-the-art mobile vision models at up to 100 or more frames per second in a power-efficient manner. So you're getting a lot of very specific types of processing, again, at the edge. I think these are development boards. This is not in a product. This is really geared towards people that want to build products using it. So there's no other product announcements, but this has tons of potential. And I know you're all about processing at the edge, so you're going to tell us what the potential is, I suspect.
Yes. So this is in line with what Intel with its Movidius stick actually offered about a year and a half ago. And right now we're looking at these on like computers. These are USB sticks that you plug into computers. But imagine being able to plug this into like a video camera, as Kevin mentioned, or even on like an industrial IoT gateway. And what you're going to be able to do is you'll have to pre-train your algorithm in the cloud. But this allows you to do inference at the edge. And it's computer vision is one thing. You could do predictive maintenance kind of algorithms. You could actually do a lot, like even like anomaly detection would be a really good one. So the sky's the limit here, and we don't actually even really know how we're going to use all this stuff. I could even see it being used like as a backup processor inside, maybe not a car, but giving your bike superpowers or something like that. I don't know. I'm kind of crazy. I'm thinking about all these fun things that computer vision or better AI at the edge would offer.
Audio processing would be another.
Oh yeah, like expanding your wake word capabilities might be an option.
Mm-hmm.
So much. Very exciting. Look for that if you are into building this sort of thing. If you're not, then all those people who are building it, look for in like a year or two having just even better machine learning at the edge that could be applied to machine vision, anomaly detection, audio, or I don't even know what else.
Whatever you desire.
Basically.
As long as you have $150, because that's the cost of the Coral development board.
And that's not much at all.
No.
So, okay. We've got, actually, I didn't mention this in the beginning, which is a shame. We have a bankruptcy filing in the smart home space. So I feel like we should talk about this. Last month, in February, Centralite, which makes a bunch of sensors and it's mostly sensors, they filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And Chapter 7 means they are not coming back from this.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Chapter 11 is restructuring. Chapter 7 is like, we are done. We are closing shop. This looks like someone had sent this in to us and they were like, this might be because of, the end of Lowe's Iris. Centralite did make the sensors for Lowe's Iris system, and Lowe's did shut that system down, or is in the process of shutting that system down. They also made the sensors that were used by Zonoff, Xfinity Home, and some other platforms. I think there are two things here. One is the end of these companies buying these to wrap in their own brand to sell to people, but also is the lessened focus on sensors in the smart home. We all thought that this was going to be people were going to buy these cool sensors and create these cool long tail applications for IoT way back at the early days of this. That's not actually what happened. Instead, what we've seen is a lot of the heavy lifting here has been done by, the Google Home, the Amazon Echo, and sensors have been a pretty small part of that for the mainstream audience. So I tried to get a list of debts that these guys have. All I could get was the list of creditors. They're pretty much as you would expect. They're basic landlords, cable service providers, nothing really exceptional. I didn't see anything huge. So we'll all join in saying goodbye to Centralite. And if you by any chance have a claim against them, you have until the May 28th of this year to file your claims. So,
it comes later in the show notes, but maybe we should talk about something else to say goodbye to. Or
yes.
It's something that's saying goodbye to us, if you think about it.
Yes, we also have another goodbye. We actually said this goodbye a few weeks ago, but this was Lighthouse, which made a connected video camera, which also had a time of flight sensor in it that gave it really exceptional depth perception. And this allowed it to get a lot more information about the environment, be even more accurate. But beyond that, it had voice recognition that it then translated into automatic routines. So I might tell the camera, I'd be like, yo, Lighthouse, if you don't see my dog walker by 4 p.m. today, send me a notification. And what it would do is it would take that command, which is really complicated for a computer to do. It would recognize it and then parse that out. And then if it did not see the person it knew as your dog walker, by that time, it would be like, hey, yo, your dog walker didn't show up. That kind of usability is pretty exceptional. The downside was it was a very expensive piece of hardware with a subscription fee associated with it. So the company did not do well. It shut down and it gave refunds to everybody. So it shut down in a lovely way. But Apple bought their patents. There's been a lot of talk about Siri and the HomePod and how it's not an awesome experience. But with something like that capability, it could become an awesome experience. What will be interesting is such a platform would have to be expensive because you would need all that, ready? Are you ready for this? That machine learning at the edge that we talked about to really understand and parse all those commands and understand what it was looking at. And somehow that data actually does have to get to the cloud. I guess it could be aggregated data. So we'll see how it does that and still has that Apple attention to privacy.
I think Lighthouse was ahead of its time, not by much, but I suspect that and the business model, with the subscription fees, et cetera, is what hurt it. And it's typical Apple to wait for a great product market to open up and then, do their quote unquote Apple magic to make it simple to use, et cetera. So I'll be interested to see if they use this for any HomeKit devices of their own, because I don't think they would, license this out to other hardware makers. It's also possible they just want to improve face detection on the phone. I don't know.
That's true. I mean,
it's possible, but
a time of flight sensor does give you awesome face detection. All right. So that's a long ago death, or not so long ago death. There is actually a recent death. Gosh, I sound so cheerful about that. I'm like, there's also a recent death, you guys. And
the most morbid podcast ever.
Exactly. Kevin, this is your buddy.
My buddy that I'm actually glad I did not drop $900 on, I think it was $900, the Jibo robot, which we knew that Jibo was shutting down. The servers are getting shut down, etc. And everybody who bought a Jibo social robot is basically going to have a useless Jibo robot because it's done. But I will give the company credit. What they have is the Jibo itself, the robot itself in people's homes is saying things like this. I want to say I really enjoyed our time together. Thank you very, very much for having me around. It's kind of cute and funny. It's all, to make a bad situation somewhat easier to deal with, but $900 brick.
Yeah.
I came close to buying one too.
I know you did. And this was a case of it being announced really early and then the functionality just skyrocketing ahead. And this was going to be like a Amazon Echo on wheels, basically. But then the Amazon Echo got so much better so quickly. Sad
Jibo.
There is a new product out, and it's worth talking about. August, the company that made the August Lock and the August Video Doorbell and was bought by Assa Abloy, which is the maker of Yale Lux, has a brand new video doorbell out. It is neat. It is neat for a couple of reasons. One, it has no wires.
Yay.
2, it is $230. And 3, it is well designed, and unlike the last doorbells, which were cool looking squares, this is something that, quote, looks like a doorbell.
It does. It looks like a doorbell. There's lots of different faceplate options. You have at least 8 to choose from to match your home's exterior. $230 on the price is a little high in my opinion, but whatever.
That's exactly what the Nest Hello costs, but the Nest Hello is wired. And this has a remote chime.
I thought I paid $200 for my Nest Hello.
You probably got it on a cool discount. The MSRP is.
Oh, that could be.
So I'm going to hold off on being very excited about this until I can try it. And the reason is because I actually had the first gen and then the second gen August doorbell camera. The first gen was not a good camera. I'll just be honest. It was not a good product. It didn't have, at night, it had no lighting options. So it was very dark. If your street was dark, you were just out of luck. You couldn't see who was at your door. It was kind of glitchy. I didn't love it. But the next version fixed a lot of those flaws. I'm assuming this will fix these flaws. It's got HD video resolution. It's got night vision. It's got digital zoom. It's got the remote chime. So yeah, we're going to just see how it works.
It also has a little bit of a limitation unless you want to pay $5 a month.
Does it has a video recording?
Yeah. So you can view a live stream at any time. If you want to see clips that are recorded when it sees motion, you can only see 5 seconds and they only hang around for the last 24 hours. If you want to pay $5 a month, then you can see.
So actually, I don't have a problem with that. That's actually the current setting I have on my August doorbell that I just took down. So prior to August announcing this, most doorbells, even the Ring, didn't let you go back unless you had a subscription. So they were actually more generous on the showing you things plan, I thought.
In all fairness, I do pay $10 a month to Nest for my Nest Hello doorbell to have access to all the video history and so on. I had a Nest Cam in my front window, and I was paying $10 a month for that, and I swapped it out with a Wise Cam and an SD card.
Yes. Cheap, cheap. We are cheap, cheap. Okay. I am singing. Okay. Other than the August video doorbell, we don't know when. Oh, it's coming out on March 28th. I'll try it when it comes out and let you guys know, because I have tried pretty much every doorbell out there and have strong feelings about them.
There's something else you want to try, and I guess I don't know why.
Yeah. I want the Echo Auto. I saw a story in Wired about how Amazon did voice recognition and such for the noisy car environment for the Echo Auto. And I don't have my invite yet. Amazon is giving them out on invite-only basis. But I really want one. And the reason is I constantly want to ask Madam A things in my car. Not necessarily to do anything in my home. I'm just like, hey, what's that device? What's that song? And you're like, Stacy, why don't you do that on your Google Assistant that's on your phone? And the answer is, I can't get Google Assistant on my phone because it doesn't recognize who I am.
Now I understand.
Oh, there she goes. She's talking to me, but she will never, ever answer my requests because I logged in under the wrong account and I can't figure out how to unlog out. And you guys may be like, Stacy, you're an idiot, but I swear to you guys, I have spent time trying to figure this out. So that's not the only reason. The other reason is my daughter wants to be able to, she doesn't like talking to Google. She doesn't have her own Google device. So she wants to just be able to ask Madam A things. I don't know if it's going to allow you to play like songs from Spotify over your car stereo, but that would be awesome if it did, or if it just played them for me from there. That would also be a reason to want that, despite the fact that I have a Tesla and I can ask it to play me all kinds of things. I really just want to talk to one thing in my life.
Right. I get it now. I get it. I think it's $50 for this thing. And
yeah, it's not expensive.
It's not expensive. You can plug it into USB, or if you have an older car with a cigarette lighter, 12-volt outlet, you can connect it to your car speakers. So I suspect you can have it play music if you wanted to. It's also designed for better noise reduction and so on. Like in a car, there's road noise and other things. So using the phone may not be the best, but that's what I do. I use either my phone or a smartwatch to get information by voice.
And we have a ton of questions. I mean, when you've got a 12-year-old riding in the back seat or multiple 12-year-olds, we have a lot of things we want to inquire about randomly on the road.
Okay.
What's the difference between a dairy cow and a beef cow? I don't know. Probably Madame A doesn't know either, but that's okay. Speaking of Madame A, there's actually a new device gets support for that system, Roku, which I am super excited about because right now I have a Roku that's attached to a Harmony that's attached to all my TV stuff. But this would give me a little bit more granularity in the control. And I kind of like that because right now the only remote controller I use now when we're watching TV is the Roku remote.
Well, you're in luck then, because you'll be able to ask Madam A to find comedies or pause or open Hulu perhaps on Roku, change the volume, etc. So yeah, that's great.
And now let's get to some meaty content on the show. So we're going to have a broad discussion about hubs. First off, we're going to start with the Wirecutter last week put out after our last show. They put out a update on, do you need a smart home hub and which is the best one? Wirecutter was basically like, look, most of you do not need a smart home hub. And I think they're right. Most of you probably do not. And if you do need one, they picked SmartThings, which runs counter to what I would do, but I get why they did it. For everyone else, they're like, you know what, just use like an Amazon Echo or a Google Home. I will say that we have had pushback from some of our listeners who are like, guys, you really should put people onto Zigbee and Z-Wave devices because they're a little bit more secure and you have this extra layer between the internet and the device. And that is a good point, but I still think it's too complicated for most people. I don't know. What do you think about the Wirecutter?
They have to appeal to as many a broad set of readers as possible. So I completely understand why they position the article this way. And I don't disagree with it either. You and I are hub people, like true hub people, not voice assistants, quote unquote, as a hub. Although we use voice assistants because we do more automation that may not be easily done without a hub. I get it. I tend to agree with you. I'm not a SmartThings user these days. I pretty much run everything on Wink. I think it's...
SmartThings does have support for more devices.
And you can, want to create custom device handlers and code a little groovy, you can do that. And that's great for people who need that. I don't think most people need that. I don't think the Wirecutter's audience really needs that. So I get it. It depends on what you want to do. I mean, if you just want to keep things simple, you can do that with just voice commands and mainly Wi-Fi devices. If you want to start expanding things and get a broader range of devices and you want to get into Zigbee and Z-Wave sensors, sure, then you move to a hub. I get it.
Exactly. So that was the Wirecutter's article. Now, as dedicated hub users, Kevin has a warning story for you.
Kevin has a I'm a dummy story for you because I feel like a dummy in some regards, but considering we, meaning you and I, Stacey, switch hubs and devices so often for testing reasons, I'm going to give myself a little bit of a pass on this, but we
won't flog you today, Kevin.
Not today. Yes, I wrote a story on the blog saying, listen, if you're switching hubs, here is why you should always remove all the smart devices from the old one first. And that sounds like common sense, but I'm going to tell you what happens if you don't do that. Because quite often when we've got a hub to test, I'll just like unplug my Wink and go set up a new hub and put devices on it and then unplug that and go put everything back on Wink real quick because like my house isn't smart anymore and I got to get it back up to snuff for the family and such. And that's exactly what I did. When I tested the SmartThings USB stick on the NVIDIA Shield TV last year, it was March of last year. It was almost 1 full year ago. I tested it, put some devices on it, did my review, took everything off and went back to Wink. I never removed everything from that hub. And what I found out was I signed into my SmartThings account earlier this week. And I have a developer account over there because I had some custom device handlers. And I noticed it still listed all of the devices on Samsung server that I had connected to that SmartThings hub. I wasn't in a total panic at first, but then I realized some of them were still showing as active, especially the Wi-Fi devices, although I'm seeing, I'll call a heartbeat ping coming from Zigbee and Z-Wave devices, which is very strange to me because they don't have access to the internet through the SmartThings hub anymore. They do connect to my Wink hub, but why would that information be going to Samsung?
Well, we're going to break that process down in a minute. But first off, let's tell people the process for just basic hub removal and maintenance suggestions.
Right. The first thing you should do if you're going to migrate to a new hub or upgrade to a new hub, etc., go to the app of your current hub and one by one, delete all of your devices.
It's especially important if you've got Z-Wave and Zigbee devices. The Zigbee devices should wander off on their own when you delete them. The Z-Wave devices, I know in the Wink app, you have to actually manually remove them by clicking on the device. So in the Wink app, I go to the hub section, and then there's a remove Z-Wave devices.
Yes.
And that's how you need to do it. And the SmartThings app also has a remove Z-Wave devices function where you're actually going to hit that button and then you actually physically press the radio, the Z-Wave. There's always a button that like turns the radio into pairing mode or unpairing mode. And that's going to physically unpair the radio. And The reason you do that is because a Z-Wave and a Zigbee radio can only be paired to one hub at a time. And this becomes really relevant in a moment.
Correct. And even though I didn't have the SmartThings hub running for the last year, I put the SmartThings app back on my phone this week, and I was still able to use it to control some of these devices. So I know that these are actively talking to Samsung server. And there's a lot of data there. I mean, even the devices that are no longer active, it shows the last state. So you could see like the temperature in my home when I took the hub down and so on. So the MAC addresses of all these devices, IP addresses of some of them. I mean, there's a lot of data left there and you don't want that out there.
No. And this is something I'm thinking as I'm moving. One, you've got to remove all the devices. And then if you want to get rid of everything, you've got to actually manually delete your account, basically. But let's get into this weird question that we have, which is some of Kevin's Z-Wave and Zigbee devices are still pinging SmartThings, and it's somehow getting this data. And we, for the life of us, cannot figure out how this is happening.
Right, because those devices cannot directly connect to the internet on their own. They need to go through some wireless device.
Yeah, they have to go through a hub.
The only thing I can
no physical hub, and it can only be paired to one hub. So that's
Correct.
Weird.
And yet, in the event log, I have all kinds of events over the last couple days. Well, many days, but I just looked at the most recent events. And the only thing I can think of, although this doesn't totally explain it, is some of those devices, Zigbee and Z-Wave, are attached to my Google Home for voice commands and also routines. And I don't know how they would still have access to the internet to get back to Samsung servers, but maybe something is triggering something. It's very strange. And I will continue researching, obviously.
This is our mystery of the day or week. Maybe it's going to be a whole week's worth of mystery, you guys. Who knows? So we'll update you on what's happening there as we figure it out. This is like our own IoT podcast hotline for Stacy and Kevin. If anyone has any ideas, send us an email. And
this is also good for people who, like you, Stacy, are moving. You need to undo everything and reset it all up and so on. And if you switch a hub, this is, I think, something that most people know they should do. I don't know if everybody does it. Clearly, I didn't. Shame on me for that, but it really makes you think when you are doing some type of hub migration, you need to uninstall everything properly.
Speaking of, this whole thing was sparked by a question that was sent in on the IoT podcast hotline about, hey, guys, I lost all the data on my hub and I had to reset it. And it took 7 hours. And we were like, oh, that sucks. But he was like, is there any way for us to back up our hub settings? And the answer to that is no.
Not really. Not really. I mean, there might be some hubs that do support it, but the mainstream type hubs do not. Not with Wink, not with SmartThings. I don't even think with Insteon.
The safest bet, like as I'm dismantling my house and taking things off, the safest bet is actually to do a reset of everything. So delete all the data from everything, because I'm having some weird issues because I didn't do that with some of my like Lutron lights and my Amazon Echo. It's just not worth contemplating, really.
And smart home devices I think, are a little more finicky than many other devices we use today. So I think you're right.
There's a lot of dependencies anyway.
Yeah.
But speaking of the IoT podcast hotline, I believe it is time to take a question from that particular hotline. But before we do, I should tell you that we, for February, have a winner. Our winner is John. And John is going to win a Wemo dimmer switch. So we're going to send that out to him. So congratulations, John. Woo! If you would like to be entered to win in the March contest, all you have to do is give us a call at 512-623-7424. And we may answer your question, but you will definitely be entered to win March's prize, which is, dun dun dun, a Schlage Encode lock. That's right. It's the new Wi-Fi lock from Schlage that I haven't even tried yet. I'm very excited. And that brings us to our sponsor. This week's IoT Podcast Hotline sponsor is Schlage. Schlage's wide variety of smart locks lets you create the smart home of your dreams. Learn more about Schlage's smart home solutions and compatibility with Amazon and Apple products, Siri, Google Assistant, and more at schlage.com/IoT. Okay, so this week's question comes from Derek. Let's hear it.
Hey, Stacey. Hey, Kevin. This is Derek. I'm from Gilroy. I started to leave you a message. I'm not sure if it was saved or not. Anyway, you can use this on the air. My question is regarding vehicle tracking systems. So Zuby has something out there, and Sprint offered something called the Sprint Drive. And so I guess I am curious, are there any privacy concerns that I may have? You know, I currently have Sprint as my primary provider, so I presume in addition to Google, Sprint probably already knows where I'm at and what I'm doing anyway. But I'm wanting to get one of these for my teenage kids so I can, kind of see where they're going, how they're driving, and give them some feedback. And so just curious if you guys have any experience with these, if there are any privacy concerns, and is there something that's even better out on the market?
Okay, Derek. At first I was like, ooh, privacy. And then I heard teenage driver and I was like, oh, we don't need privacy. We need to keep an eye on our teenage driver. And here you have a bunch of solutions, and you've named a couple of them already. You could use a tracker just to know where they are, but I don't like that because for a teenage driver, I actually do feel like there's a lot of benefit for knowing how they're driving. So I'm going to suggest an OBD port monitor device. And I'm actually going to suggest you could actually do any number of it. There's 2 variations. The cheaper ones usually connect via Wi-Fi or something over your phone, so the data is not continuously sent to you. The more expensive ones that come with the subscription fee, like Verizon's Hum or the Sprint one that you mentioned, those are connected via cellular, and you can get real-time status updates on where they are, how fast they're driving, how they're applying their brakes, and all kinds of other data.
Which is pretty useful for a new driver to have, I think. And the privacy aspect, I think Derek is right. I mean, at this point, the carriers, and these are the carrier solutions you just mentioned, which is why I bring this up, they already have so much information from the smartphones that we all have, or most of us have today. So yeah, you're giving them a little bit more.
You're giving them your driving data. And the OBD port data is things like, hey, how fast is this person going? How are they braking? Where are they going?
Right. But the flip side is, and I've used one of these before in my ODB port, a lot of insurance companies do offer discounts based on a set time of driving. They capture data, say, for 30, 60 days, etc., from that device, and you could get a discount if you had a relatively safe driving period. So It might save you money. Again, now you're giving up data to somebody else, and that's up to you to decide if that's worth any potential cost savings. But from a privacy standpoint, it's just a teeny weeny bit more information than they probably already have.
And I would also say to you, keep an eye on this. The Zuby or the Automatic also does an integration with IFT. And this is interesting because you can actually use that data, put their driving data or their location data into spreadsheets, and then you could apply that to like a map and see like broadly what your teens' habits are. Or you could just get, there's all kinds of tracking data, and you can also set up like notifications you could get an email when the car's engine is having trouble, or a text. And that sort of thing might be really interesting to you. So I would say check out both Automatic and Zuby because of those connections. I'm sure you can set up that on Verizon's Hum as well, or the Sprint thing. But I think IFT just has a little bit of a richer interface option. So Derek, that is our advice for you. Good luck with your teen driver. I'm not there yet, but I'm really nervous about it. So, all right. That concludes the news portion of this week's show. Stay tuned for a conversation with Chrissy Meyer, who is a partner at Root Ventures. She also was a product manager at companies like Square and Apple, and is going to talk about how to build hardware for consumer and enterprise IoT, as well as explain to us why the heck connected devices cost so much and what you can do for your favorite companies to support them and give them a little extra margin boost. Woo! Before that, let's hear from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Affero. Hey everyone, we are taking a break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Affero, and I have CEO Joe Britt back on the show with us. In the next 4 episodes, we're going to cover a range of topics with Joe. So, Joe, last time we talked about Mitsubishi Bank combining IoT and banking. Before we get to that, can you remind our listeners what Affero does?
Of course. And thank you, Stacy. It's really good to be back and talking with you again. Affero provides everything that you need to connect anything to the internet, from helping you build a business case all the way through rollout, ongoing management, and data analytics. Our customers tell us that Affero is the best choice for a great end user experience and developer productivity. It's also beautifully designed, really easy to use, very fast, and very, very secure.
All right, so let's talk now about what's happening with Affero and Mitsubishi Bank. This is the largest bank in Japan, one of the largest in the world, and it has a pretty long history.
That's right. Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group dates back to the 1880s. It's actually the world's 5th largest bank by total assets, or about $2.5 trillion. This project with Mitsubishi UFG is really one of the killer apps of IoT. Connected things, of course, deliver value, and in many occasions, that leads to a financial transaction. These things typically transact through a person holding a mobile phone, but down the line, they'll also be able to transact directly with each other based on smart contracts and things like that. We call this project the Bank of Things.
Why is Mitsubishi Bank creating this Bank of Things?
Mitsubishi Bank is creating the Bank of Things to exponentially increase the surface area of devices that can actually be paid for digitally. Most of these devices are things that fade into the background and are so cost constrained or resource constrained that it doesn't make sense to attach a traditional expensive payment terminal to the actual device. But using Affero, with a very inexpensive and simple but secure Bluetooth connection, Mitsubishi Bank can allow their customers to make secure payments to almost any kind of device at almost any price point.
Awesome. So what is the main challenge here?
The idea is you've got things like parking meters and vending machines. Why aren't all those things connected to the internet? They're not all connected because it's really expensive. You either have to put a cellular radio in each one, which costs a lot, or you have to put Wi-Fi in them, and then you have to provide some Wi-Fi connection nearby. But with the Affero solution, all you need is a really inexpensive Bluetooth radio. And then we're able to set up a secure connection through the user's smartphone back to the internet. And we use that secure Bluetooth connection so that the cloud can command the device to do something after the payment has been processed.
Where can people go to get more information?
Affero.io/go-big is always the best place to start. If you're a developer, you can also check out developer.affero.io and check out all the resources that we have on affero.io.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Chrissy Meyer, who is a partner at Root Ventures and who is a product designer at a bunch of hardware startups. Hi Chrissy, how are you doing?
I'm good, Stacey. Thanks for having me.
Man, I am super excited. We're going to talk about crazy things you are building in your own home. We're going to talk about venture capital trends and consumer versus enterprise IoT. And if we're really lucky, we're going to talk about managing supply chains. So much fun. Let's get started. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Root Ventures and what you're doing there?
So Root Ventures is a venture capital firm. We are hard tech investors and we focus on the seed stage. So basically what that means is that we're making investments really early in startup companies who are solving very hard technical problems. So things like hardware, IoT, robotics, manufacturing, and developer tools. Before I joined Root, I spent the past decade building consumer electronics products. So at huge companies like Apple and Square, where I learned how to scale to massive, massive volumes, and then all the way to very early stage hardware startups, where I learned how to build teams and build organizations. I've spent a ton of time inside factories and inside suppliers, mostly in Asia. And now I get to take everything that I learned over the course of that career and use it to help guide Root's investment thesis and also help advise all of the companies that we invest in.
Awesome. So let's use that expertise and talk first off about at Root and specifically as a venture investor, because that is a different mindset than someone who's an entrepreneur, for example, or even a product designer within a company. What are you looking for when you evaluate consumer IoT hardware investments?
So not many investors say this, but at Root, the founders that we're most excited to talk to are the ones who walk into our office with a half disassembled prototype rather than a super polished pitch deck. So we're looking for deeply technical founders with a bold idea and who have the experience and who have the know-how to be able to pull it off. It's funny that people pitching and people showing me demos are often super apologetic that their robot didn't work or that their software hit a bug or that their parts were 3D printed and not injection molded. But honestly, like as a technical investor, that's really what I want to see. Like I want to talk about the challenges that they're having and I want to see the areas that are super high risk and I want to hear about their plan of attack for how they're going to overcome those issues.
Okay, so yes, if I bring you my disassembled prototype, I'm already looking good. What are the pitfalls you see in the consumer IoT around hardware startups? So once you've started on your journey, maybe you've got something awesome, where do you see companies or maybe founders start to make the mistakes? And in hardware, your mistakes can really cause a lot of problems. You can't fix it quite as easily as software.
That's definitely true. So building hardware for enterprise is hard, and I don't want to downplay that at all. But building hardware for consumers is even harder. I feel like on the consumer side, more than half the battle is just figuring out who the heck is going to buy your product. It's really not as straightforward as people often think. So once you have that figured out and you know who your target market is, then you have to figure out distribution channels. So in other words, like how are you going to get your product to those customers? Is it retail stores? Am I selling on Amazon, direct online? Am I partnering with other businesses or am I bundling it with other products? Like those are all options that people consider. And the other thing that I think that people fail to realize a lot about building consumer hardware is that it is really difficult to make any money at all on the product itself.
Before we get to kind of laying out all the costs associated with a connected device, which I think both people trying to build one and people who are buying one will appreciate, let's go back to this idea of identifying your market, because I do see a lot of people build things that seem to solve a particular problem for them, which in some cases, like Dropbox, is awesome. And in other cases, like maybe Juicero comes to mind. It feels like, ooh, that was so niche and it costs so much. How do people find their target market?
it's not an easy thing. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And it takes a lot of getting out and just talking to the customer. I think the number one bit of advice that I like to give to people is to test early and test often. So I don't care if you have like 3D printed parts, and I don't care if your prototype is barely held together. Like I call it the duct tape prototype. Like as soon as you have something that you can test, even a subset of the functionality, get out there and get people using it, because that is how you find out what resonates with people and what doesn't. And that's also how you find out who it resonates with and who it doesn't resonate with. And you can refine your product based on that. But the real challenge with it is it takes a lot of stamina to get out and just keep talking to those customers and keep testing with those customers again and again and again, and doing that as much on the front end as you possibly can, because the further you get along in product design and the further you get along in manufacturing, it gets harder and harder to unwind wrong decisions.
Right. It's hard to iterate when you've already produced 1 million or 10,000 devices. Okay, so let's talk about costs and my favorite word, BOM, which stands for Bill of Materials, you guys, which is basically a fancy way of saying how much it costs to make. Let's break that down, because you shared a surprising stat with me about if I have a cost to produce something of like a bill of materials for $100, then I actually have to sell this for like $300?
Yep. It's the unfortunate reality of shipping consumer hardware. I mean, I think people don't always fully understand that I can't build a device for $100 and sell it for $200 and make money off of it. That's not how it works. So there's so many things that you have to add in, like fulfillment fees and freight charges and warranty fees and credit card fees. And like the list goes on and on. Like I could keep going. The reality of the situation is that if you build a $100 device and it costs you $100 to assemble it, so $100 BOM cost, then that might bring you up to like $130 if I'm lucky by the time I tack on all those extra fees. And then if you're selling through retail, you have to turn around and give 30 to 50% to the retail store for every single product that they sell.
And that's just the difference between wholesale and like MSRP?
Yeah, and it's to the point that every retailer expects to take a margin to actually stock your product, hold the inventory, and put it on their shelves. So now this product that costs $100 to build, I have to sell it for $200 just to break even, and then I have to sell it for $300 if I want to make any real margin or make any real money off of it. So it's a tough business to be in when you're building a consumer product. And you've got to remember that your average consumer is pretty price sensitive. So selling a product for $100 versus $300 might make a huge impact on their decision whether or not to buy it.
Okay. And this is why, as consumers, we see a lot of companies like launch their products, sell only on their website, and maybe sell to Amazon. How does Amazon differ from putting something on a physical shelf?
Amazon also takes a fairly significant margin, so they'll also take a pretty significant chunk off the top, but they're able to do so at a much lower cost compared to physical retail stores that are carrying a significant amount of inventory.
Got it. So if you really love a startup, you should buy from their website, is the moral I'm hearing here.
Absolutely. They would love you for that.
Okay. So we talked a bit about consumer. Let's talk about enterprise. How is investing in enterprise IoT companies different, and specifically the hardware companies? What are the differences in selling hardware to enterprises versus consumers?
So on the enterprise side, when you're selling products to companies, you've got to remember that the sales cycle can be painfully long. It can take a really long time to close a contract. It can take a really long time to get a purchase order approved, because sometimes you have to go like 5 levels up the management chain to get signatures from everyone. And you might have to go through multiple rounds of pilot before you get anywhere close to even closing that contract. At the end of the day, it's tough, but at the same time, like you can sustain and you can grow a successful business by selling primarily into Fortune 500 companies or bigger enterprise customers.
And on the enterprise side, when you're building hardware for them, do you have to worry quite so much about things like, oh, is this the prettiest package? Does this have that space age, white, shiny Apple design or that fabric covered? I don't even know. There's all kinds of design trends happening. On the consumer side, what do enterprises look for when they buy hardware?
That's a really good point. Usually you don't, but sometimes you do. It varies dramatically based on who your customer is, who you're selling to, and what the product is and what it does. Interestingly enough, like I worked at Square for a while and we were building the little credit card readers, and we were not selling to consumers. We were selling to businesses. They were small and medium-sized businesses, but it was still a business-to-business play. And it was because the piece of hardware was going to be forefront for them when they were interacting with their customers. It was very important that it did have the level of polish that you would expect in a consumer product. So I think it really depends on what the product is, and it depends on who you're selling it to and how it's going to be used.
All right. And so for any of these companies, enterprise, consumer, let's break down some of the challenges that you might have in your supply chain in getting this sort of thing built and manufactured. You know, a lot of this happens in Asia. We all hear horror stories. We also hear horror stories about doing it in the US. So what kind of advice can you offer people about physically manufacturing the device and then managing the supply chain for things that go into it?
So I like to tell people that you can have the best product design in the world, but if you don't have a supply chain that can pull it off, you're never going to make it to market with your product. So as part of my job at Root, I spend a pretty significant chunk of my time advising new hardware companies who are just starting to think about how to go about setting up a supply chain. And there's a few mistakes that I've seen people make, and there's a few bits of advice that I like to tell people up front. And one is that your manufacturing partner has to be well matched to your company stage and also to your product complexity. You have to look beyond just the technical capabilities, that they can check all the boxes on the technical side, but culture fit and attitude is super important too. So if they're not willing to move at the speed that you're used to, it's not going to be a good fit. And then the other thing is just that Asia isn't always the answer. So I see that people consider their hardware product a success if they've made it to Asia, but I don't think that's the right way to think about it. I think that you need to be pushing really significant volumes for Asia to make sense. And even then, it doesn't always make sense. So you shouldn't make that leap to manufacturing in Asia until you know that you're really, really ready. The last mistake that I see is people assuming that like bigger is better, that I want to work with the biggest factory partners I can find because they have a big name and they're well known. And of course, they're going to do a good job. But being a small customer at a large top tier supplier means that when you run into problems, you're going to struggle to get resources and you're going to struggle to get attention. I've had that problem many times over. I mean, one time I was working with a startup and we were partnered with a very well-known top-tier factory. I'm not going to name any names, but we had been given a fantastic team, A-plus players. They were doing an amazing job. And we were halfway through the project. And then suddenly, like the entire team disappeared overnight and was replaced by like newly hired engineers. And I mean, like their badges were still warm coming off the printer, like literally people that they had hired like 2 to 3 days beforehand. And of course I freaked out, but it turns out that like my amazing team had been reassigned to like a big famous customer. And since we were such a small startup working with this big factory, there really wasn't anything I could do about it. And that is the kind of problem that you can run into if you haven't been really strategic up front and if you aren't well matched with your supply chain partners.
Okay. And as a consumer, I sit here and I'm looking at all of this, and probably the number one concern I have with my hardware devices is actually security. And that's very similar in the enterprise world. What are you seeing? I mean, we hear a lot about like design with security in mind. We hear a lot about like the bare minimum should be no hard-coded passwords, encrypt everything, blah, blah, blah. And we've got a lot of new standards coming out. UL is working on a standard. ARM just announced something on the device side. Again, a lot of chatter about this. So what are you advising your companies to do? What are you thinking is important here?
Security is huge. And personally, I'm glad to see that we're moving towards more and more legislation around it. But for startups that I work with, it's something that I like to stress needs attention from day one. Like, it cannot be an afterthought. I mean that from the moment that you start architecting your product, you should be thinking about data, you should be thinking about privacy, you should understand the concept of PII, like personally identifiable information. You should understand what it is and how you're going to handle it. And if you're building a consumer product, you should probably disclose what types of sensors are inside of it. And when you think that you have all of your bases covered, when you think you're in a really good place, don't stop there and bring in an expert. Let them poke holes in how you're handling security and how you're handling user data. Trust me, like, hiring a security consultant now might feel expensive, especially if you're an early stage startup. But if it prevents product returns, or even worse, if it prevents a lawsuit or a really bad headline, it's worth every single penny.
All right. And we talked briefly before the show about some of the cool things that you've done actually in your own home. And so since we have all these crazy consumers who I know you guys out there listening do a lot of fun stuff. So tell me, what's your favorite project that you've done so far in your own home?
At Root Ventures, we were one of the earliest investors into Particle. And I know you and Kevin have talked about Particle on your show before, but the great thing about Particle is that as an IoT development platform, they have like really nailed the integration of cloud plus firmware plus hardware in an incredibly easy to use way. I would never claim to be a software developer, but I've been able to get Particles up and running all over my house. And I think my favorite project is that I used one to connect my fireplace to the cloud. So now I can turn the fireplace on and off with Madam A, and I never have to leave the couch. It's amazing.
I have to ask, what is your command for turning on the fireplace? I really want it to be good.
It's pretty boring, actually. It's just Madam A, trigger the fire on, trigger the fire off.
that. I feel like Madam A, it's getting hot in here would be excellent. All right.
I think I might have to go update it now. The other thing that I did with Particles is I mounted another one to the lid of my dog food container, so that now I get notifications anytime my husband feeds the dogs, because we were having problems where they were getting fed twice. It was happening more often than we'd like to admit. So next on my to-do list is I want to go back in there and add a notification in the event that the dogs don't get fed and we forget to feed them. But if you've seen pictures of my dogs, they're actually a little bit on the larger side, so I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if they skipped a meal or two.
So that's your dog's least favorite automation, is what I'm imagining. They're like, oh, we had it so good. Okay. Well, Chrissy, thanks so much for coming on the show, for sharing all of your hard-won knowledge. I'm imagining it was pretty hard-won on manufacturing hardware.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Stacey.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.